The air in the boardroom smelled of stale coffee and high-stakes anxiety. It was 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of gray, rainy afternoon where the skyline of the city looks like it has been sketched in charcoal. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, my hand resting on a document that was thicker than a dictionary and worth considerably more. Across from me sat Julian Mercer, the lead negotiator for Apex Dynamics. Julian was a man who did not smile. He merely adjusted his facial muscles to indicate a transaction was complete. He was wearing a navy suit that likely cost more than the first car I ever bought. "The terms are acceptable, Walter," Julian said, his voice dry as dust. $5 billion for the acquisition of Vance Tech, contingent on the final regulatory sweep and the retention of core leadership during the transition phase. Apex Dynamics is happy to have you. I felt a knot loosen in my chest. 16 years. That is how long it had been since I sketched the initial schematic for our quantum encryption chip on a napkin in a diner. Now it was the industry standard, protecting banking networks across North America. "We are happy to be part of the Apex family, Julian," I replied, clicking my pen, a silver Park jotter I had since college, and signing the final page. My older brother Gerald sat to my right. As the chairman and owner of 51% of the voting shares, this was technically his victory. But everyone in the room knew who had built the engine that drove this car. Gerald was sweating, his eyes darting around the room with a nervous energy. "It is a great day, Walter," Gerald murmured, though he would not look me in the eye. "A great day for the family." "It is," I agreed, closing the leather binder. "Our parents would have been proud." The door to the boardroom swung open. It was not the assistants with the champagne. It was Chloe, Gerald's 27-year-old daughter, my niece. Chloe had joined the company 6 months ago, fresh out of an MBA program that she had barely scraped through. She walked in with the unearned confidence of someone who had never heard the word no. Her heels clicked aggressively against the hardwood floor. "Are we done here?" Chloe asked, not looking at me, but staring directly at the signed contract in the center of the table. "Just finished, Chloe," I said, offering a polite smile. "We are celebrating." "Good," she said, finally turning her gaze to me. Her eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth I remembered from when she was a child, "because we need to discuss the restructuring immediately." I frowned, looking from her to Gerald. "Restructuring?" "Chloe, the ink is not even dry on the acquisition papers. We have a strict transition plan with Apex Dynamics. Nothing changes for at least 12 months. Julian Mercer stood up, buttoning his jacket. "I leave the internal politics to you. Walter, I will see you at the integration meeting on Monday. Remember, Apex is buying the Brain Trust. That means you." "I will be there," I promised. Julian left, his team trailing behind him like a silent school of sharks. The room suddenly felt very small. "What is this about, Chloe?" I asked, turning to her. "You do not interrupt a $5 billion closing to talk about organizational charts." Chloe smirked, leaning against the wall and crossing her arms. "Gerald, tell him." I looked at my older brother. Gerald was wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief, his face pale and eyes avoided. "Walter." Gerald started, his voice cracking slightly. "The board met this morning before the signing." "And?" I asked, the temperature in the room seeming to drop 10 degrees. "And we decided that for the next phases, the Apex phase, we need a modern vision," Gerald said, rushing the words out. "Chloe is going to be taking over as Chief Executive Officer, effective tomorrow morning." I laughed. It was a reflexive, incredulous sound. "Gerald, be serious. Chloe has been here 6 months. She does not know the difference between a qubit and a basic database line. Apex Dynamics expects me to lead the integration." "Apex expects a Vance to lead it," Chloe interjected, stepping forward. "And I am a Vance, a younger, sharper one. We need to pivot away from your outdated operational models, Uncle Walter. You built the technology, sure, but you do not know how to sell the future." "I just sold the company for $5 billion, Chloe," I said, my voice rising. "I think I know how to sell." "You sold the past," she countered. "I am the future. Pack your things, Walter. We will discuss your severance package in the morning." I looked at Gerald, waiting for him to correct her, to step in and be the older brother. He just stared at the polished mahogany table. "It is majority rule." "Walter," Gerald whispered. "I am sorry, but the board voted. Chloe has my backing." The betrayal hit me harder than the absurdity of it. Gerald and I had built Vance Tech from our father's garage, but over the years, I had focused on the engineering while he accumulated the voting shares through family trusts. I stood up, grabbing my silver pen. "You are making a mistake," I said quietly. "A very expensive one." Chloe just laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "I think the company can afford it. Go home, Walter. Your time is up." The next morning, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with rain that had not yet fallen. I arrived at the Vance Tech headquarters at 7:45 a.m., just as I had every day for the last 16 years. But today my keycard did not beep. The little light on the security scanner turned a harsh, rejecting red. I tried it again. Red. Walter. I turned to see Ryan, the head of security. I had hired Ryan 10 years ago, when he was struggling to find work after leaving the military. I knew his wife's name, and I had helped pay for his daughter's medical treatments when she was sick. He looked like he wanted to sink into the concrete floor. "Ryan, my card seems to be demagnetized," I said, though I already knew that was not the problem. "It is not demagnetized, Walter," Ryan said, looking at his shoes. "I have orders from the top. You are not allowed on the premises without an escort. Your access has been revoked." I felt a cold flush of humiliation creep up my neck, but I kept my composure. "Revoked? By whom?" "Chief Executive Officer's orders," Ryan mumbled. "Miss Chloe." "Fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Escort me then. I need to get my personal effects from my office." The walk to the elevator was the longest of my life. The lobby, usually a place where employees would wave or stop me to chat about ongoing projects, was deadly silent. People looked down at their phones or stared at their computer screens, avoiding eye contact. They knew. In a corporate office, bad news travels faster than light. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, the change was immediate. My nameplate had already been removed from the door of the corner office. In its place, a hastily printed card read, "Chloe Vance, Chief Executive Officer." I walked toward the door, but Ryan gently placed a hand near my elbow. "Sorry, Walter, you cannot go in there. Mr. Finch packed your things." Peter Finch, our general counsel, was standing by the reception desk, holding a single cardboard box. He looked like he was about to vomit. "Walter," Peter squeaked, adjusting his glasses. "This is standard procedure for a termination of this level. The board wanted a clean break, immediate separation." "Termination," I repeated, taking the box. It was light, too light for 16 years of my life. "I founded this place, Peter." "The board voted," Peter said, sweating under his collar. "Chloe felt it was best to prevent any security risks or intellectual property leaks." I looked through the glass walls of the main conference room. Chloe was already sitting in my chair, surrounded by her new strategy team, a group of consultants in tight suits who looked like they had never seen the inside of a server room. She saw me standing in the hallway. She did not look away, nor did she wave. She just smirked, tapped her wristwatch, and turned back to her presentation screen. It was a complete dismissal, an attempt to erase my existence from the company I built. "I need my personal files, Peter," I said, turning back to the lawyer. "My research notebooks and the physical prototypes in my office safe." "Company property," Peter recited robotically. "Intellectual property of Vance Tech. Under your employment agreement, all files must remain." I looked at the box in my hands. A framed photo of my wife, Rachel. A ceramic mug my daughter made for me. A couple of reference books on quantum mechanics. That was it. "You are making a mistake, Peter," I said, my voice low and calm. "Did you brief Chloe on the acquisition terms? Did she read the final contract?" "She did not want a briefing," Peter stammered. "She said she has an MBA and knows how to manage transitions. She wanted to establish her authority immediately." I shook my head. "An MBA is not a license to fly a jet, Peter." "Please, Walter," Ryan said softly, his voice full of regret. "Let us go. I do not want to make a scene." I looked at Ryan, then at the employees watching from their cubicles. Fighting in the lobby would achieve nothing. I walked out of that building with my head held high, clutching the cardboard box. As I stepped onto the wet pavement, the rain began to fall. I sat in my car and stared at the glass tower. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah Miller, my executive assistant. "Walter, Chloe just ordered a complete change of access codes for the server rooms. She is planning to lay off the senior engineering team next week to reduce overhead. She told the staff we are pivoting to blockchain and AI services." It is a disaster. I stared at the screen. Laying off the core engineers and pivoting to buzzwords. She was going to destroy the technology. But then, A memory of a negotiation session with Julian Mercer from 3 weeks ago came back to me. A specific clause I had insisted on to protect the company and its employees from being immediately gutted after the sale. I had told Gerald about it, but he had been too busy looking at the valuation numbers to pay attention. I started the car. I needed to get home and verify the contract. The fight was not over. It was just moving to a different arena. I drove home in a silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers. The house was empty. Rachel was out at her weekly community service, and I was glad for the quiet. I needed to think without distraction. I went straight to my home office, placed the cardboard box on the floor, and opened the personal safe hidden behind the bookshelf. I kept physical hard copies of all major corporate agreements. I did not trust digital servers that could be wiped with a keystroke by a hostile board. I pulled out the heavy leather binder containing the final draft of the Apex Dynamics acquisition agreement. 300 pages of dense legal terminology that represented the sale of my life's work. I flipped the pages until I found what I was looking for. Page 47, Section 4.3. Essential Personnel and Leadership Continuity. I ran my finger down the paragraph, reading the key man provision. It stated clearly, "It is understood and agreed that the continued active employment and leadership of Walter Vance as project lead and chief executive officer is a material condition of this agreement. The purchaser, Apex Dynamics, is entering into this transaction in reliance upon the key man's specific technical expertise and operational control. In the event that the key man is terminated, demoted, or otherwise removed from his position prior to the closing date or during the 12-month transition period without the express written consent of Apex Dynamics, this agreement shall be immediately null and void." I smiled, but the smile did not reach my eyes. It was a cold, hard realization. Firing me had voided the $5 billion acquisition, but it was the next paragraph, Section 4.4, that contained the real payload. In the event of termination of this agreement due to a breach of the key man provision by the seller, Vance Tech, the seller shall be liable to pay the purchaser a breakup fee of $400,000 within 5 business days to compensate for transaction expenses and market opportunity costs, $400 million. Chloe had not just fired me. She had triggered a massive debt that Vance Tech could not possibly pay. I knew the company's financial sheets inside and out. We had $45 million in cash reserves. The rest of our valuation was tied up in physical servers, real estate, and intellectual property. If Apex Dynamics demanded that fee, Vance Tech would be insolvent within a week. I picked up my desk phone and dialed a number I had stored in my memory. Eleanor Sharp, attorney at law. Eleanor was a brilliant corporate litigator who specialized in high-stakes disputes. She was sharp, relentless, and owed me a favor from a previous patent defense case where I had testified for her client. "Walter," Eleanor answered, her voice brisk. "I saw the press release about the Apex deal. $5 billion. You must be celebrating." "I am not celebrating, Eleanor," I said, looking at page 47. "I was escorted out of the building by security this morning. My niece Chloe has taken over as CEO, and my older brother Gerald supported the move." There was a silence on the line, followed by the sound of paper shifting. "She fired you?" Eleanor asked, her tone shifting to professional focus. "Yes." And she did not read the acquisition agreement, specifically Section 4.3 on page 47. I heard Eleanor take a slow breath. "Does Apex Dynamics know yet?" "Not yet," I replied. "Walter," Eleanor said, her voice dropping into a calm, dangerous tone. "Do you want to negotiate a quiet exit settlement, or do you want to enforce the contract?" I looked at the cardboard box on my floor. I thought of Chloe's smirk and Gerald's silent betrayal. "I do not want a settlement," I said. "I want to enforce the agreement to the letter." "Meet me at my home office in 1 hour," Eleanor said. "Bring the contract. This is going to be a very brief war." An hour later, Eleanor was sitting across from my desk, reviewing the pages. Her gray suit was immaculate, and her eyes scanned the lines with practiced speed. "It is watertight, Walter," she said, closing the binder. Chloe's MBA did not teach her how to read a key man clause. Under Delaware corporate law, the board has a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the company and its shareholders. By terminating you without Apex's consent, they have breached that duty and triggered a catastrophic liability. "What is the next step?" I asked. We do not notify Vance Tech, Eleanor said, a cold smile appearing on her face. We do not warn Gerald. We go straight to Apex Dynamics. We notify Julian Mercer's legal team. They will have no choice but to protect their shareholders and demand the breakup fee. I looked out the window. Firing this missile would destroy Vance Tech. Gerald would lose his majority stock value, and the company we spent 16 years building would collapse. But they had made their choice when they escorted me out. Send the notice, I said. Eleanor nodded, opening her laptop. Consider it done. The clock starts now. For the next 48 hours, I stayed inside my house, watching the rain beat against the windows of my study. My wife, Rachel, sat with me, offering silent support. She had warned me for years that Gerald's greed and Chloe's ambition would eventually cause trouble. But I had always focused on the technology, believing family loyalty would hold. I was wrong. My phone sat on the desk, buzzing occasionally. I had muted the ringer, but the screen lit up with missed calls. Gerald Vance, 5 missed calls. Peter Finch, 3 missed calls. I ignored them all. I had no obligation to help them debug the mess they had created. At 2 p.m. on Thursday, I received a text from Sarah Miller, who was still working at the office. Walter, they are throwing a party in the main atrium. Chloe called it the New Era celebration. She ordered catering, champagne towers, and hired a photographer. She just announced a 10% bonus for the executive team to celebrate the upcoming acquisition. Gerald is standing on stage with her, holding a glass of champagne. I shook my head. They were celebrating a $5 billion acquisition that was already dead. They were spending money that would never arrive. Half an hour later, the tone of Sarah's texts changed dramatically. Walter, something is wrong. Peter Finch just ran into the atrium holding a document. He looked completely pale. He went straight to Gerald and Chloe. Walter, Chloe is screaming at him. Gerald just dropped his glass. The champagne is everywhere. The music has stopped. People are starting to leave the atrium. I closed my eyes, imagining the scene. The sudden silence in the room, the shattered glass, and the realization of disaster. My phone began to vibrate continuously. Gerald was calling again. Then Chloe. Then Peter Finch. I let them ring. Then a call came from a Manhattan area code. 212. It was Julian Mercer, I answered. Walter, Julian said, his voice cold and precise. I received a formal notice from your attorney. Is it true that you have been terminated from Vance Tech? Yes, Julian, I said. Chloe was appointed CEO, and my access to the building was revoked yesterday morning. Julian was silent for a moment. This is a material breach of Section 4.3, he said. Our board has already met. We cannot proceed with the acquisition without your operational control. I am sending a formal termination of the agreement to Vance Tech's legal counsel. We are also demanding the immediate payment of the $400 million breakup fee as specified in Section 4.4. I understand, Julian, I said. It is within your rights. I am sorry it ended this way, Julian said, but we must protect our interests. The escrow accounts are frozen. Good luck, Walter. After hanging up, I looked at the stock market terminal on my computer. Vance Tech was a private company, but the news of the deal collapse was already leaking. The financial blogs were posting headlines. Apex Dynamics pulls out of Vance Tech acquisition. Giant penalty clause triggered. At 5 p.m., Gerald finally drove to my house. He did not ring the bell. He pounded on the front door. I opened it. He looked disheveled, his tie crooked and his face red. Walter, he shouted, stepping into the hallway. What did you do? What did you tell Apex? They just sent a demand letter for $400 million. They frozen our bank accounts. I did not do anything, Gerald, I said, keeping my voice calm. Chloe fired me. She triggered the key man clause that was in the contract you signed. You have to fix this, Gerald pleaded, his voice cracking. Call Julian Mercer. Tell him it was a mistake, a corporate misunderstanding. Tell him you are still running the technology department. We can give you your office back. We can pay you whatever you want. I cannot lie to a public company, Gerald, I said. That is securities fraud. I am not going to prison to cover up Chloe's incompetence. She wanted to lead. Let her lead now. By Friday, the situation at Vance Tech had descended into absolute panic. The news was official, and the financial journals were running detailed articles about the ouster of the founder and the resulting $400 million liability. The banks had invoked the material adverse change clauses in Vance Tech's revolving credit lines, freezing the company's operational accounts. Payroll was blocked, and employees were standing in the hallways, packing their desks. At 1 p.m., Peter Finch came to my house. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot. "Walter, the board is begging you to attend an emergency meeting tomorrow." "Saturday morning," he said. "We cannot raise $400 million in cash. Our reserves are gone, and our credit is frozen. We face involuntary bankruptcy by Tuesday if we do not settle with Apex. Chloe is willing to resign immediately, and the board will reinstate you with double the equity options. Just call Julian Mercer and ask for a waiver." I looked at Peter Finch. "Peter, Apex Dynamics is a public corporation," I explained. "Julian Mercer cannot waive a $400 million asset without facing shareholder lawsuits for breach of duty. The debt is real and it is legally binding. I will attend the meeting tomorrow, but I will not lie for you." "Bring your lawyer," Peter sighed. "We need all the help we can get." On Saturday morning, the VanceTech parking lot was crowded with cars. I arrived with Eleanor Sharp. She was wearing a dark gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. We walked up to the executive boardroom. Gerald was sitting at the end of the table, looking like he had aged 10 years. Chloe sat next to him, her face pale but her eyes still filled with defensive anger. Peter Finch and the rest of the board members sat in silence. "We do not need outside lawyers here," Chloe muttered as we sat down. "This is a family matter. It stopped being a family matter when you escorted me out of the building with security guards, Chloe," I said. "Now, it is a liquidation crisis." Eleanor Sharp opened her briefcase and placed a document on the table. "As of 9 a.m. today, Apex Dynamics has secured a temporary restraining order in Delaware court, freezing all of VanceTech's assets," she announced. "You cannot sell your real estate, your servers, or your patent portfolio to raise cash. Any attempt to do so will be treated as asset dissipation under the law." Gerald looked at Peter Finch. "Is this true, Peter?" Peter nodded slowly, staring at his hands. "Yes, Gerald. We are completely locked down. We cannot pay the $400 million. If we do not file for voluntary Chapter 7 bankruptcy today, Apex will file for involuntary bankruptcy on Tuesday, and the court will take control of everything." "What about our shares?" Chloe asked, her voice rising. "What about my inheritance?" "Your inheritance is gone, Chloe," I said. "The company is insolvent. The only question left is whether you want to face personal lawsuits from the shareholders for breach of fiduciary duty under Delaware corporate law. If you file for voluntary Chapter 7 now, the assets can be sold in an orderly fashion to pay the creditors and secure the employee pension funds." Gerald stared at the table for a long minute. The silence in the room was absolute. Finally, he looked at Peter. "File the papers, Peter. Chapter 7. Let it go." Chloe let out a quiet sob, but Gerald ignored her. He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I am sorry, Walter. I should have listened to you." 3 weeks later, the assets of VanceTech were put up for public auction at a hotel conference room. I sat in the back row with Eleanor Sharp. The company's physical servers, office furniture, and real estate were sold off to various bidders to pay the debts. Then came Lot 200. The core patent portfolio and technical prototypes of VanceTech's quantum encryption technology. Bidding starts at $1 million, the auctioneer announced. A representative from a competitor raised his hand. $1 million. $2 million, Eleanor said, raising her paddle. $3 million, the competitor countered. $5 million, Eleanor said. The competitor paused, realizing that without my engineering team and my expertise, the patents were useless. They could not reverse engineer the code. The competitor lowered his hand. "Sold for $5 million to bidder 88, the auctioneer declared, banging the gavel. I had bought back my life's work, which had been valued at $5 billion just a month ago, for $5 million of my personal savings. Gerald, who was sitting in the front row, turned and stared at me with a mixture of shock and anger. "You planned this," he whispered. "You took the company from us." "I did not take anything, Gerald," I said. "Chloe fired me, and you supported her. I simply bought the assets at a public auction after you ran the company into the ground." The next day, I met Julian Mercer at a quiet restaurant. He offered his hand, which I shook. "Congratulations, Walter," Julian said. "I hear you have registered a new entity called Vance Innovations." "Yes, Julian," I said, "and we have the quantum encryption patents. I am open to a licensing agreement with Apex Dynamics, but we will not be selling the company this time. We keep control, Julian smiled. I would expect nothing less, Walter. Send us the draft terms on Monday. I walked out of the restaurant into the bright afternoon sun. For the first time in 16 years, I was my own boss, and the technology was finally safe.